really interesting piece today because manufacturing is obviously a hot topic right now, in particular with the talk about tariffs, with the president's emphasis on reviving manufacturing. So what's the problem here?
Well, everybody knows that employment in manufacturing has gone down a lot over the decades. And as a share of overall employment in the U.S., it's gone from like 30-something% to 8%. But manufacturing output, if you measure it in inflation-adjusted terms, has actually gone up over the decades. There's some issues with how you measure that because a lot of it is just that computers, because they're much higher quality, that counts in the GDP as higher output, the same amount of computers because they're better. So that's something that you have to sort of get your head around. That's weird. But the other thing is, so good way to think about manufacturing's role in the economy is what's its share of GDP? And so this got started actually last week. It was this fight on Twitter between Jim Pethokoukis of American Enterprise Institute, Austin Goolsbee, the former Obama economic advisor, and some Trump supporter. And the Trump supporter was saying, well, manufacturing share of GDP has fallen from like 25% to 10%. And they were saying, no, 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 manufacturing share of real GDP has remained constant. And they cited a couple of articles. And that got me looking, and it turns out actually the Trump supporter was right, and Austin Goolsbee and Jim Pethokoukis were wrong.
And the key thing is that the claim that manufacturing has maintained itself is based on the idea of historical share of real GDP, which attempts to inflation adjust all these things. So when you look at prices or a different change in output, it tries to adjust for it. But as you point out, the best way to do it is at any given moment do a share of nominal GDP, because within that year it's going to be consistent. You shouldn't actually adjust it.
I mean, and that's what the Bureau of Economic Analysis that produces the GDP numbers, they say that's what you're supposed to do when you're doing it over time. The issue is just prices of manufacturing goods haven't risen nearly as fast as other prices in the other things in the economy, like healthcare. And so there is this tendency to think, well, so share of nominal GDP is underrepresenting this relative improvement in manufacturing productivity. But the problem is, and I could barely explain this in print, I'm not going to be able to explain it on TV fully. There's a paper by Carl Whelan from 2000 that everybody can look up if you want to get the full explanation. But the problem is basically that the way real GDP is calculated, dividing something by real GDP over a period of time turns out to be complete nonsense. The different parts of real GDP over a long period of time don't actually add up.
So the charts that we're accustomed to seeing might be misleading. They might not be telling the whole story. You actually did some legwork here, and you contacted different agencies and different groups to say, wait, this might not tell the whole story. What did they say to that? How did they respond?
Well, so initially I contacted Carl Whelan, who had wrote sort of the classic paper on how you're supposed to deal with real GDP calculations. He was at the Fed then, he's a professor in Ireland now. And he looked at a couple of these charts that had been referred to in the Twitter debate I was talking about, and he said, yeah, those charts are wrong. So then I emailed the authors of those charts, and the guy at the St. Louis Fed never got back to me, but the two guys at Brookings, Barry Bosworth and Martin Bailey, did, and they basically acknowledged that, yeah, we know this is a flawed measure, but we thought it was better than dividing by nominal GDP. And after a lot of talking to other people and just doing my own calculations, it's not.